name is Wilson Mutua. I'm speaking on biblical principles of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship from kingdom perspective. Entrepreneurship from a kingdom perspective. Now, entrepreneurship is basically identification of an opportunity and coming up with the relevant activities in order to exploit that particular opportunity while being ready to bear the risk. Every entrepreneur or anyone who want to venture into entrepreneurship must be willing and ready to bear the risk of the enterprise. The other thing that an entrepreneur will require is the management skills of that particular enterprise, because it is one thing to identify an opportunity, is another thing to know how to go about the management, because everything rises and falls on leadership or management. You have to come up with proper management skills in order for you to be able to experience growth and expansion of your enterprise. Now, why are we talking about kingdom entrepreneurship? We are speaking on kingdom entrepreneurship because from the beginning we see God had an idea of people enterprising. In Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 18, God speaks to Israel and says that it is Him who gives them power to generate wealth so that He may establish His covenant which He made with their forefather concerning their day. And so we are saying that God gives us power to generate wealth. And for what purpose? For the purpose of meeting and fulfilling His purpose and covenant, or establishing His covenant which He made with those who went before us. There are those things that the men of old, the prophets, the apostles, and those who died and went to be with the Lord before they could see the fulfillment of the promises, they saw things in our times, and these things are coming to pass in our day. And now, for those things to happen and for them to be fulfilled, besides God's providing the grace, the wisdom, and the power, and the energy, and good health, God also provides the financial resource that we require, because the kingdom of God, for it to advance, we also require financial resource. And that's why God gives His people wealth so that they can partner with the prophetic words that were spoken, so that that covenant that was given to our forefather can be established and be manifest in our day. That's why we need to speak about entrepreneurship from a kingdom perspective, because part of what will require for us to advance God's purposes, it is actually money. Now, in also Genesis chapter 13 and verse 2, we see Abraham was a wealthy man. Abraham was a wealthy man. He was rich in silver, gold, and cattle. And the same man was a worshiper. He worshipped God. Besides being heavily wealthy of silver, gold, and cattle, that man also worshipped God. In Genesis chapter 13 and verse 2, Abraham was a worshiper. He was able to mix between, or to manage the two issues of having physical wealth and maintaining his spiritual life. And that's why he qualified to be the father of our faith. And so we need wealth, because Abraham was rich in silver, he was rich in gold, and also was rich in cattle. And he used these resources to fulfill God's purposes. In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 2, we see Abel and Cain. They were enterprising, they were doing business. Abel was looking after flock, and Cain was a farmer. And at one time, they brought an offering before God to worship God with what they had worked for. So both Abel and Cain were enterprises. They had enterprises, and out of their labor, out of their hard work, out of the enterprising activities, one time in the course of time, they brought an offering before God to worship God with what they had worked for. And so we see men, even from the beginning, they were working, and they would bring the fruit of their hard work to worship God with whatever they had worked with. And even in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15, we see God, when He created man, He told him to work in the garden. He brought Adam and He took him in a garden after creating him, and He commanded him to cultivate, to make the garden better. So from the beginning, we see God had in mind the issues of enterprising, that man was not created to be idle, to be lazy, but to work and to improve on what God has given him. And so entrepreneurship is also a ministry. in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 11 to 13, where the saints come to the church or to corporate assembly to be prepared for work of service. And work of service is not necessarily during the Sunday service activity. The work of service involves even the marketplace. When people are coming for corporate worship, they receive grace from the fivefold ministry and even directly from God as they interact with God personally in their own personal spiritual activities, spiritual lives, in their own connection with God. They receive grace, and this grace enables them to go out there in the marketplace in order for them to be effective. So people are prepared for work of service. God's people, the saints, are prepared for work of service so that they can go out there in the marketplace. The work of service is not just in the house of God, in the church. It's not in the building where we come to worship. All of us cannot fit. All of us cannot be able to do the work of service during the Sunday service that can last maybe up to 2 or 3 hours. But most of us will engage in the marketplace as business people, as entrepreneurs, and professionals in different field of our engagement. And so the work of service is not necessarily in the church, but we need to be prepared so that we can get out there and engage gainfully in the marketplace so that we can generate resources in innovative manner. We can come up with ideas, we can generate business ideas, we can start enterprises for purposes of advancing the kingdom of God. Just like where we read in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 18 that it is God who gives us power to generate wealth so that we can fulfill the covenant which he made to our forefather.